Christmas Eve 1945. That was the first time I met my dad. He turned up on the doorstep Christmas Eve. This soldier stood on the steps with his kit bag and said, "Come on, son, let me in." I said, "Well, who are you anyway?" He said, "Well, I'm your dad." Oh, I've got a dad then. It was quite a difficult period growing up in that particular time, but I mean, that was history.
I was given away when I was a baby to my nan. She died when I was 14. Family didn't want me, so I ended up on the streets. I didn't want to be stuck in a system. I remember laying down in a doorway and someone coming up and telling me I can't sleep there. I apologised, thought it was their place. They said no, the police would take you away. It was a struggle because sometimes you wouldn't eat for a week. You got abuse of people. It's a big problem being homeless today, because if you are truly homeless, people abuse you. I met a lot of people that had a lot of mental health issues. I met people that have been in a war. Just don't be abusive to people on the streets, because one day they could end up like that. They got a fancy house, they got everything they need, but one day they could end up with nothing and they could end up homeless, and then they'll think back about why didn't they help that person?
We used to play in the street because in those days there was virtually no traffic like there is today. I can't even remember if anyone owned a car in the road anyway at that time. It wasn't until the mid-50s that cars started to be parked in the road, but then only occasionally.
In the 80s, Acorn Bookshop in Chatham Street was the hub for most of the alternative and radical activity in Reading. Before the internet, Red Rag, Reading's alternative newspaper, provided information about gigs, benefit demos and campaigns. At the time, the miners' strike, US cruise missiles at Greenham Common in Newbury and mass unemployment were big issues. Red Rag helped people find out what was happening in Reading. It was printed and often collated at the bookshop, generally on a Friday after the shop shut, as the printing presses were very loud. I remember printing into the small hours. Then a team would collate the newspaper and it was distributed for free across Reading. It was published every fortnight for over 10 years. It was a pre-internet communication network that enabled communities in Reading to organise for social change.
We had no electricity. Electricity didn't come until the mid-50s. We just had gas lamps.
I got this money as an inheritance, and I decided to invest it in a therapy suite for my art therapy. I was at the Cuckoo's Nest, Oxford Road, based on a community project, based on self-help, and based on art therapy and based on well-being things we can do as an alternative to legal or illegal drugs. So there's a group of mental health people that came together and decided to emancipate themselves, try to free themselves from the constricts that society puts on them, and tried to emancipate themselves in terms of activities that they get involved with, in terms of creative pursuits. I wanted to encourage the X-Men and the Jedi and the Lensmen and the creative mind in exercising the power of mind, rather than being a dilapidated mental ill person. I was enthused energy of the achievements which we could make as mental ill person with a special adaptation of our minds that we have, with a special focus, how we can use that, how we can show them they're wrong to be prejudiced against us. Great purpose in mind. I think you don't get the opportunities in life when you're put in boxes and incapacitated and put on benefit. You're in a negative pigeonhole, and often those conditions are self-prophesying, and you do get depressed. You do get into negative states of mind, I was just trying to turn it all around to the positive, trying to turn the negative picture around to the positive and turn it on its head.
We used to go down to all the home games and along with dozens of others park our bikes in front of the houses. I can remember some of the older players, many of them I used to deliver newspapers to. There was Fisher, Gordon Bryce. Blackman, of course, was quite a popular character in those days.
I remember Cyril's second-hand shop, just nearer into town, more or less opposite a pub on the corner called The Battle. But sort of more or less opposite that, a bit further down, there was a thing called Cyril's second-hand shop, run by a guy called Cyril, presumably. And when I was at school, I was fascinated by it. So I'd come along and sort of wander around, you know, looking at all different second-hand things. I think I bought a camera there because I found a camera that was the same as what my dad had, and I decided to get that. I think Cyril, goodness knows what he'd been earlier, but whenever you were in the shop, he was always keeping an eye on you. You always felt that Cyril was somehow scrutinising you. There was a slight feeling of not fully comfortable, but on the other hand, he did let you kind of look at the stuff. And then when you decided to buy something, you know, you'd sort of be feeling that he was thinking, well, am I really allowed to buy it? Is he really going to let me buy it? Sort of thing, kind of odd when you think. But in those days, people that ran shops like that were sort of a bit eccentric. You know, everyone was their own thing. So yeah, I do remember that Cyril's second-hand shop. Yeah, it was good. That was an event to go there.
The cinema was the Pavilion, Saturday mornings for children's cinema. It was 6pence downstairs and 9pence upstairs, and the usual sing-songs and cowboy films. And that was always packed on Saturday mornings. Characters like Roy Rogers and several others.